today's forum, courtesy of Forum SIV. We are speaking about truth to power, media and democracy in COVID-19 times. And on our panel, we have quite some distinguished colleagues. And I welcome everyone. So I'll ask the members, the panel members, to quickly introduce themselves, starting with George. George, I think you're muted. I can't hear you.
Sorry, yes, I've now unmuted. Hi, everyone. My name is George KEGORO. I work at the Kenya Human Rights Commission, and I'm very pleased to be part of this important discussion.
Thank you, George. NJOKI, please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is NJOKI GACHANJA, and I am with the social justice movement. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, NJOKI. And GADO, please introduce yourself.
Hi, guys. My name is Godfrey Mompembwa GADO. I'm an editorial cartoonist with The Standard and also co-founder of Buni Media, a multimedia production house that is based in Nairobi. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, GADO. And last but not least, NERIMA, please introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is NERIMA. I'm the Executive Director of Siasa, which is a youth NGO. So we focus on the constitution, electoral processes, and governance.
Thank you, Nerima. And my name is Mwalimu Mutemi Wakiama. I'm the moderator for today's session. I'm a community organizer, activist, social justice entrepreneur, and with very diversified interest in communications and especially media and advocacy. So without much ado, I'll jump into the first question. The question is for the day is with the persistent patterns of many African governments stifling the media, keen to control truth around COVID-19 that we have witnessed. I think this is not even limited to just the African governments. How has the media role as an independent source of information, but also as a watchdog on behalf of the public being impacted? How has COVID-19 impacted our ability to speak truth to power, and the media? Has the media played its rightful role in that during that time? So I don't know who wants to take the question first. Maybe we could go in the same order that we started. Maybe George, your thoughts. You're muted, George. Sorry.
Okay. I think the first thing to say is what COVID-19 has done is it made it. I mean, the measures of the responses to COVID-19 included, in the case of Kenya and a lot of countries, excluding Tanzania, lockdown and curfews and generally confinement of people. The fact of confinement has the effect of keeping everyone at home, and people feel vulnerable because of the degraded capacity to move around. That has effect on the media because media is made up of individuals. Journalists, subject to a little more liberty than the ordinary population, everyone has been locked at home. So it increases vulnerability because you can't escape, you get a sense that the government knows where I am right now because everyone is at home because it's curfew time, for example. So that fact of being rendered sitting ducks has had a profound effect on media, because people feel a vulnerability that they haven't felt, because you've got limited movement and limited choices and limited escape if it should ever be needed. Secondly, the fact of reduced associational life means that you also have reduced opportunities for getting information for media, and also reduced opportunities for verifying what people are hearing. When people circulate, they're able to pass on information, including casually. They're able to verify information, including casually, and therefore it promotes the access to information, that the public access to information. The fact of disassociation that has been one of the features of lockdown has undermined the capacity of populations to circulate, and therefore the capacity of media to report. Thirdly, the logic that if you question what the government is saying, or the things that the government is saying need to be done, you are, COVID-19 has been presented as something like a war, and I think the public authorities in Kenya have used that kind of terminology, or that kind of imagery, as this is a war, that kind of thing. When it is a war, then it means once you promote the imagery of war, the war means you belong to a side. People belong to sides. So media has been told, in this war, choose your side. Are you on the side of the enemy, that is on the side of COVID-19, or are you on the side of the population and the government and the public and that kind of thing? So in being made to choose sides, inherent in that is being made to choose between accepting the offering of the government of truth, or questioning that offering. And it's that every time you question what has been offered as the official truth, then it's very easy, and we've seen it in many ways, it being portrayed that you have now crossed onto the other side. You're on the side of the enemy. Now, the thing about COVID-19, if you have a conventional, the imagery of a conventional war, Iran, Iraq, there is people, for example, which is one of the more recent conventional wars that we've had. Whichever side you take, there are good things to be said for it and bad things to be said about that in a conventional war. You can't find anything good to say about a person who takes the side of COVID-19. There's no, there can be no justification if you use the imagery of war for anybody who says that in this war, I choose the side of COVID-19, because that side is a side of death. Now, so the fact that you have been, we have all been made to choose the one side, which is the side the government represents, the public represents, undermines the ability to question, because that the questioning is presented as though you are disloyal to our side and you've taken the side of the enemy, which is COVID-19. Let me stop there.
Sorry, thank you so much, George, for those thoughts out official truth. That sounds so much like 1984 by George Orwell. I don't know what your thoughts are, NJOKI, on this.
I think George
NJOKI,
has
you can hear me,
captured.
and the question is, okay, yeah.
I think George has actually captured it very well, because
Yeah, just go ahead.
in this
Go ahead.
pandemic times. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I'm saying George has actually captured it very well, because during this pandemic, the biggest question has been, how independent is the media, this notion that the media is independent or should be independent has actually come crashing during this pandemic, because you would find that there's a lot of fear that the states, the governments have actually installed, so that anyone that does not read from their script is actually seen as an enemy. Look, for example, at Tanzania. Tanzanian journalists were actually completely banned from covering anything COVID-19. So, and you see the response to COVID-19 has largely depended on how the government of the day actually responds to COVID-19 pandemic. So if the president of the day does not believe that the pandemic is real and does not therefore see the importance of putting the measurements in place, then that is where the whole country will go. And you see, the media plays a very big role in just setting trends and setting the narratives of the country. So you find it's like a double-edged sword, because the moment it lies on misinformation, the moment it lies on lies, and things that are actually not verified, it actually misleads a whole country, Back here in Kenya, I've really been questioning why we don't even have alternative media, because it looks like all the media houses that we have are now all state owned. They will just they will cover this press conferences every single day and just take exactly what the government is saying. No one is questioning the numbers. No one is questioning the testing. No one is actually reading from a different script. No one is doing their own research. And you would see from the investigation piece that Daddy Sokari actually did, things really changed, because that is the one person that was actually able to get out of the box and question the figures that we were being given, question the reality on the ground. Because if you come to the ground, many Kenyans will ask you, today they've said we have 1,000 people who actually tested positive. Do you know anyone who's positive? And mostly, all these Kenyans asking themselves these questions, the answer will be, mimi sijui mtu yoyote mwenye ako na hii ugonjwa. So when you have a media that can't actually question these narratives on the ground, can't question these numbers, it's actually a very a dangerous precedent, especially in our quest for democracy.
Very good presentation, and I'd like to invite our colleague who's actually working for the media and a fearless speaker of truth to power, GADO. What are your experiences, especially as having been part of the guys we are accusing of not being able to speak truth to power? GADO?
Yeah, sorry, I think they've been, I couldn't hear you properly. I think you were drifting in and out. Can you repeat the question? Did you put the question or?
Yeah, as one of the people on this panel who actually work for the media, what has been, and one who fearlessly speaks truth to power, what has been your experience and the experience of your colleagues around trying to control truth, and especially from overtures from the government? I hope you heard me now.
Thanks, Mutemi. First of all, I think George and NJOKI have put it very succinctly in terms of the introduction and what is happening to the media and media practitioners. And picking from that, I think as a media practitioner, it has been quite difficult to deal with two things. One is that what NJOKI and George laid out, that you are, as a media, you are given this official line, and so that basically reduces the ability of the media to question that line. So it makes your work very difficult. Second, there was the issue of misinformation and disinformation that was already in place, enabled by social media and the internet. So the COVID crisis took advantage of that, and it was basically very difficult for the media and media practitioners to verify information. And it must be understood that COVID itself, you are talking of a completely new phenomena, and it's not like we governments, doctors, and health experts and public health experts did not actually have the official truth. We, in essence, we were having new information about the disease, about the virus every day. So that actually basically also caused even more confusion as far as the media practitioners are concerned. And so in the sense, when you are trying to distill this information and probably do in my case, for example, do a cartoon, an editorial cartoon on that fact, it becomes quite difficult and challenging. And so one of the things, for example, I did personally, especially in the early days, I engaged myself in doing a lot of public awareness work and challenging misinformation. And so I did a lot of drawings attacking that, and then also doing a lot of drawings on the attacking governments that are out there basically misleading, or for political reasons that we have seen in many countries that use the pandemic to basically further their own agendas. And this leads me to the next point, that what COVID has presented to most governments is also the ability to clamp down further on the media and the media practitioners. What this COVID has done is actually, to use George's war analogy, is to say we are in war. And when you are in war, you are either with us or against us. And when you use those terminologies, basically you are giving governments, or rather governments, were basically using unconstitutional means to reinforce their agendas. And it has actually given dictators and authoritarian rulers the chance actually to further their agendas, is to say, once you are if you are against us, if you question that the state narrative, you are basically you are our enemy. So that has happened, and we have seen, in fact, that has even that has happened as far as even in the Western countries. So that has, in essence, also very much complicated the work of media practitioners, and very much reduced the ability of media practitioners and media houses to question the government's narratives, to question state narratives, to speak truth to power, to say what is happening there. And again, if you are to go, and again, what George said, because to a large extent, also COVID has reduced the movement of media practitioners and journalists to seek that very truth. It has even made our job much more complicated. I think I will stop there.
Thank you so much, GADO, for that succinct feedback. NERIMA, lastly, on this question, what has been your experience in terms of truth or information from the media, and especially our media so far?
I think what has been fascinating for me has been how people have used the internet a lot to search for this information. And I wrote about it, where I said that in an age where we have all this information online, it's still limited in terms of it being relevant and it being factual. And there's a point that GADO spoke about, which is very, very key, about it being a novel virus and people not quite understanding. So the truth changes month by month. And what I talked about is a typical example where they said that if a person is infected with the virus, you could catch the virus, hence PPEs. And there was all this protocol and measures in terms of burying the individual, burying them in a limited time frame. Family members have to be below 10 in these ceremonies, and then it has to be done within the hour, and they can't touch the coffins. And 2 weeks ago, the Ministry of Health said, oh, actually, it doesn't move from a dead infected body to the individual anymore. And so what has that done to your mentality? So it just means that even though now we can say, okay, it's been proven, it still does something to our psyche. It's still going to be difficult for family members to even bury their loved ones, in a sense, without fear. And so I think it's been understanding the sharing of information and also the spreading of fear. And I think that's a very complicated kind of balance to have, but it's not something that has never happened before. It has. And even Mutemi, when you are talking about this entire process being very Orwellian, and that's exactly what I wrote about 1984. And so the fact that we are relying on this information coming from one particular source, that frankly, that source is also struggling with this information, makes things very complicated and different across countries, because they're also trying to figure out how to handle it according to their culture, according to their systems, according to their kinds of governments, according to how their social structures are built. So how a particular country next door handles it is not the same way another one would handle it, which makes things even more complicated. But I think just to conclude is to say that in the article, I had done a bit of research about the 80s and AIDS. And when AIDS was spreading in the US, a lot of people thought that people could still contract the virus when an individual dies as well. So when you have cities like New York that had particular islands to bury people who had AIDS in specific sections of graveyards, shows you that in and itself, mankind does not change that much when dealing with fear or things that we don't understand. Because today that would be just plain crazy to even think that there was a separate cemetery on an island far away because of people having a particular virus.
That is such a great perspective, NERIMA. I didn't know that happened in New York. That's very informative, and we've all seen the fear and the stigmatization around Corona, and I think a lot of us have tried to change that narrative. I go back to George, especially in our experience in Kenya and in East Africa. What would you say our regimes have done to try and control the official truth? Have they done so? And what could be the intentions? If we look at the response in Kenya and the response in Tanzania and Uganda, but also across Africa, what is your view on this? Hear me?
Yeah, you broke up quite a bit, but I think I got the the general drive of your question, which is how have the and that's anyway how what I'm going to speak to is how governments have tried to control the official story
and use it for your
and why.
Your own political. Yeah, thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. Tanzania has an election in on the 28th of October. That is next month. But Tanzania has also had responses to COVID-19. The response was to deny its existence and to basically say that because the country is prayerful, unlike their neighbors who are not as prayerful, it has overcome. God has intervened and taken away their COVID-19 problems. Because of the restrictions in travel, it means there are very few people who are able to go to Tanzania, and the inability to travel to Tanzania has made it difficult for international observation in relation to the election in Tanzania to be organized. Burundi had exactly the same approach, where international observers were told that if they want to come to observe the election, they have to first of all submit themselves to quarantine on arriving in Burundi, in ways that then completely would undermine their ability to actually participate as observers. What COVID-19 has done in the case of Tanzania in particular is that it has reduced their election into a village affair. Tanzania is going through an extremely difficult time, an extremely difficult election, and this election is definitional of the difficulties politically that the country has had or is having. But the fact of international distraction, the fact that the world is distracted by COVID-19 and domestic cares everywhere, and the region is also distracted in each country because of their domestic cares, a lot of them related to COVID-19, is what has enabled Tanzania to successfully maneuver its election from a regional concern into a village affair. So whether or not Magufuli gets re-elected, and how Magufuli gets re-elected, if he does, is not a concern for the region, and there is therefore no regional pressure on Tanzania to do the right thing in relation to the election. And this is largely and chiefly because of the COVID-19 and the restrictions that it causes and has caused to the situation in Tanzania. how has Kenya, and how do you explain the responses that we have had in Kenya? When the first case was reported on the 13th of March, we moved in on the 22nd of March to announcing the curfew, and soon after the lockdown of certain counties that were regarded as having the greatest exposure to COVID-19 as at that time. The attempt to carry out the curfew were undermined significantly by logistical problems to do with, for example, you saw what was going on in Mombasa, where people needed to cross the ferry. It takes ordinarily a particular amount of time to cross, but it took a lot more time on that day because when people are usually crossing and it takes them a lot of time, they have many hours in which to cross. But because you have to cross at a particular time in order for you to beat the curfew, it means that then the crossing could no longer be truncated. Everyone met at the ferry and there was chaos. Obviously, that embarrassed the authorities. And all the chaos, the transport chaos that were seen of trying to enforce the curfew, all that obviously embarrassed the authorities. How did the authorities respond to the embarrassment? They responded with violence. Violence has been a tactic in the narrative. So the narrative doesn't become the fact that years of failure to provide public services have made it impossible for us to respond to COVID-19 in a way that would be effective. The narrative that failure gets buried in the new narrative of police violence. So police violence is the reaction of an embarrassed government. It's beating people. That makes, by introducing the element of violence, it makes it impossible to have a reasoned discussion about what needs to be done. It is like parents or providers in our home, for example, who are not able to provide food or the basics for their families, and then to cover their shame, you make it impossible to have a reasoned discussion about the inabilities, and violence easily becomes one of the ways in which then you change the subject. You say, "Hapa kwangu, I make the rules," that kind of thing, and it often becomes a cover for the inadequacy that people feel about the unmet obligations. And so one of the ways to understand the violence we've seen in the responses to COVID-19 is an attempt to change the subject, an attempt to undermine and to make it impossible to have a reasoned discussion about the failures that we've had and witnessed that are inherent in a long failure to provide social services. Let me say one more thing. Governments derive their power largely because they posture that they have at any given time more information than all of us. At any given time, governments know than all of us. That's why we trust them. We give them our money. We give them the legitimacy and the power to make decisions for us. In return, they posture that because they have all this assembly of information and the knowledge, they know what needs to be done. They have better information at any given time than any one of us. COVID-19 created a situation where the government did not know. And we knew that the government did not know. If government tells you ordinarily that stay home because thugs will attack you, or some insurgents in a part of the country are about to attack you, intelligence reaching us says that it is dangerous for people to be out. Insurgents are about to attack a village, and if government is taking measures to control those insurgents, that should be something that we comply with. But COVID-19 created a situation where the government could not tell us we have intelligence that this is about to happen, because they didn't have any more information than the population. But as I said, the difference is not only did they know, they also knew that we knew that they didn't know. So how has that what shaped their behavior? It has shaped their behavior into one of secrecy. You've seen, for example, in New York, in the early stages of responses, the Cuomo kept saying, "Don't know what to do. Give me solutions." That was an example of a government official saying, "I am in power, I am in charge, but I don't have any more information you do. I'm inviting the public, providing information by providing solutions." That was not the stance the Kenya government took. The stance the Kenya government took was one, we are not in a position we don't want to tell you all that we know, because it may prejudice our and yet
George, I think yeah, your internet is a bit shaky. But I think we got the gist. Oh, okay, you're still speaking.
I don't know whether you got what I was.
Yeah, I got the thrust of that last bit of your, which is the one that broke up. That we had a government that did not know and did not want people to. I think that did not want to admit that it did not know, compared to what, for example, we saw in New York. I think we all experienced also here in Kenya, we experienced most government officials disappearing into their bunkers for the first 1 month or so, around February and March, of course, because of lack of information. But it's also kind of showed how clueless our leadership is. NJOKI, I don't know how you would say, as someone who works with communities that were really affected by the lack of information and the lack of, and the trying to control the narrative. I don't know how you and the communities you work with, experience this lack of leadership.
I would say that there's a joke that goes around that the pandemic left China as a pandemic, and by the time it was getting to Africa, it was actually business. It was an enterprise. So one of the biggest blunders that this government actually made in their response is how they actually turned a medical issue into a full security issue. You remember immediately they announced that now there's going to be a curfew. The biggest victims are the people, especially from the informal settlements, because now the police went completely rogue. You would get arrested for things like a mask, and the only way you get out of a police station when they've arrested you is when you give a bribe of 2,000 shillings. And nobody was really asking these questions, And at that particular time, because everyone was misinformed, even when your rights are actually violated, it is the community that will tell you, but why are you not wearing a mask? You know, we are really we're really in difficult times. So why are you not wearing a mask? You actually deserve what came to you. When you are caught out during the curfew hours, you were seriously beaten. You know, people died. You know, we have the examples of Akina Yasin. We have the examples of the homeless person from Madare. At some point, police brutality had killed more people than COVID had actually killed, you know, and no one was questioning this. And because the government's response was to instill fear, even when you are trying to call for solidarity from the community, people will tell you, no, these are very abnormal times and we cannot afford to act normally. So they use that particular bit to actually normalize violence and to actually normalize police brutality and to justify it, you know. And then the other bit is you say that the leadership actually went into bunkers. It is very interesting that at that particular time, the questions that we were asking at the informal settlements was, now the government says we need to wash our hands. The government says that we need to stay at home. And we're saying, we don't even have water here. So how are we going to wash our hands? You know, these are the questions that we were asking. We were asking, I am a Buddha person. How am I going to work from home? You know, because most of the measurements that were actually put by the government were not making sense to the common mananchi, you know. And no, I was really questioning these things. And I remember the social justice movement actually released a press statement asking these questions. You've told people to stay at home, but you've not told people what they will eat. And so, again, you know, the politicians came out and you would see people branding their sanitizers, branding their tanks, branding food, you know, and went full campaign mode, you know, that where I am, the lack of food has completely taken away my dignity. But you want to come and identify me further by actually giving me a packet of flour that actually has your photo on it, you know, further propelling the you know, the narrative of Messiah, that the only reason I'm actually eating is because you came through. And every time I will look at that packet of flour, I will remember that it is you who actually came through. So the government really failed its people, because you're telling people to stay at home and you've not told them what they will eat, and so they're vulnerable. And so anyone who will come with the little they come with, you know, their intentions notwithstanding, will look like a messiah to the people, you know. And again, I also think it came as a blessing in disguise, especially for those who were organizing the BBI, because at that particular time, that is when they really wanted to now really push it into the ecosystem and run with it, you know. But there was this sense of they were ill prepared, and they were in you know, inadequacies that they had not really covered, and they knew that when they would come to the ground, the people that were opposing were actually you know, well prepared. So what did they do? They actually literally closed down the country, and they went back to what I would call a boot camp. And so you would see the likes of Murade Atwoli and all having a field day in having all these meetings, while they've told these other people who know they thrive in churches and in grounds to actually stay at home, you know. So they use this opportunity to arrange their cards better, you know, and put their game in order, while they've told everyone else, but then, you know what, there's this dangerous disease that will kill you when you go to the streets. And you will find that they would hold these meetings where they would consult and come up with political statements. But when activists go to the streets, they're actually beaten up and they're arrested, and they're told you cannot protest at this abnormal times, you know. So it was really a blessing in disguise for them, because they used this particular time to regroup and to put their houses in order. And now they think they're ready, and now they're slowly opening up the country, because they think now they have the winning cards, And finally, the conversation of late has changed from the pandemic being a pandemic to what we are now referring to COVID-19 billionaires, because again, when it came here, and the cartels that we have, and the people who actually run this country, they were like, we have a crisis. How do we benefit fully from this crisis by the time it is actually over? And you will find that most of the people that actually benefited the most are those who are closest to power. From the exposés that have actually been done, it is those ones who are actually right at the foot of power that have swindled Kenyans of all the all the funds that came through, the memes that have been going through the internet, where you find like a donor was saying, we actually have 1 billion to support maybe street kids, and you will find people do photoshops to put a particular face there, and then with a bull to actually fit that role, because ideally all those funds that have come to Kenya, who have they helped? You will find the president saying proudly that there's 10 billion that is being sent to Kenyans. Again, I go back to the questions that we keep asking ourselves on the ground. Wewe umepata hii pesa that people are saying is being sent, and in like the 50 neighbors that you have, no single person has received. And in that neighborhood that where you come from, there's the disabled, you have all the single mothers that the most vulnerable of society. And in this just quick conversation with 50 people, none of them has received these funds that the government is allegedly giving. So you wonder, if I know all these vulnerable people and none of them is actually professing that they've gotten this money, then who's gotten this money? So the government response has really been shit, and it's been, what will we get most from here, and who are we going to use to actually make sure that the people stay stay contained, as we're having a field day. So they've used the police and they've used the media to actually contain the masses, and it's really been a sad state of affairs.
Thank you, Njoki, for that impassioned and well-reasoned contribution. Before I go to GADO, because GADO works for the other side, or for both sides, speaking truth to power, but also the media. Let me ask NERIMA to just pick up from where Njoki has left in terms of leadership. Leadership when COVID emerged, and the reporting around then, from our media, the transition that we have seen where we were not allowed to congregate, but some people were allowed to congregate, some politicians, and the way the media reported that. And then today now, where we've come to the COVID-19, and as Kenyans are saying, the budget, the billions had been eaten, then the restrictions, the numbers came down. If you can pick it from there.
It was definitely odd to see the numbers decrease so rapidly. And because we've been through, by the way, Kenyans, we've been through a lot of trauma, to be very frank, especially when we talk about the kind of corruption scandals that exist. So much so that even when our papers or media would report it, we would just feel so frustrated and numbed that a lot of people would choose the option of just completely blocking information out, which is what has happened now with COVID-19, where people are not even following the press releases. Actually, right now, most people who are wearing masks are in Nairobi. Outside there, there are people not wearing masks, and they're wearing them in the CBD because they're afraid that the police will catch them or something like that. But if you go, people are not wearing masks. And that shows you that there's no trust even in our own leadership in terms of, do they really care for us? Because before this pandemic, we clearly saw the amount of scandals that had come through. Then we've been seeing now COVID-19 billionaires. And just like NJOKI said, the people who are involved are the people who are in power. But also what's frightening is the fact that they are definitely above the law. When we have the ministry saying that you can't even meet with family members and being more than a certain number, but then the images that are coming up on the news about these politicians who are still campaigning, it's a double speak. So what are you expecting the public to do, or how are they supposed to behave? And another thing that I saw that was also portrayed quite frequently was how young people are the ones who are the rapid spreaders of the virus. They are so terrible. You know, there was this messaging around, they're just partying, they don't care, they're gonna kill the old, they're traveling to the village. And there was no sense of even trying to understand that 80% of the informal sector is where the youth are able to sustain themselves. There's no way that they can work from home. People are still being kicked out of homes due to lack of rent. A lot of the problems that NJOKI has talked about. So this was the only period where family members in rural areas were sending food. They were sending food to the cities. That's something that we've never seen before. And even when we were able to move due to the counties opening up, the first thing people did was send their children to the villages because there's no way they can maintain them here because people had lost their sources of income and sustainability. So when it comes to the leadership, I do agree that there was a bit of a lull where politicians were not able to campaign and things like that. But now we've seen how now they're going full speed ahead. So they're trying the best that they can to put things back on track, which is unfortunate because it makes us see where their priorities are. We should be discussing the economy. We should be discussing how our government is going to cushion that economy. We should be discussing accountability. Individuals, ministry, departments that have been involved in these scandals, those particular people or individuals within them being held accountable. A new phase, because we're going to have very limited resources. And those limited resources are going to have to sustain a large number of the population. And so the majority population being youthful should be something that keeps the president sleepless at night. Him being the global youth ambassador, that needs to be a priority issue for him, not necessarily what we're doing as a country in terms of amending constitutions and having conversations around referendum. But at the end of the day, it's still back on the people. So as much as we celebrated 10 years of our constitution, it's kind of unfair that we expect the public to give feedback on a constitution that is limited, on a constitution that they don't have access to, on a constitution they are not aware about, and ask them to review it and whether it's necessary for us to make certain amendments. And as young people, we've done a lot of research on why youth believe what they believe. We had done a study last month, just before August 27th, whether you think our constitution should be amended. And a lot of them would say that it's not being implemented well. That they know. And they also know that their leaders do not follow Chapter 6. They also know that Chapter 6 is weak. But those are the only things. If you ask them the details, they don't know. If you ask them where they receive this information from, it's normally from individuals within their circles who normally are older individuals. Whether it's your father, your uncle, an elder, it's from an individual. So the fact that we rely on individuals for information, it makes it dangerous for Kenya when it comes to factual, researched access to information. That's limited. So an individual will share what they feel is important for their locality. That's how we have leaders. When you go to a particular area in Kisumu or say something like that, they will push for regional blocks because that is what they have had their leadership say. Regional blocks are important. That's how we have access to these resources. It's the only way. It's the only way. But then when you go deeper, they don't quite know why that is their stance, but they are fully aware of whose stance that is, the individual that they follow, and that's the information that they will take. So I think it's very worrying when we have our leadership that influences how we think and influences the majority population, and that's how the majority population makes their decisions. And if we continue to move in that direction, it's very easy to say that even when media is controlled by certain individuals, that information is now completely perpetuated and infiltrated or shared even more rapidly when they own radio stations, when they own newspapers, when they own television sets. It's an uphill battle that now civic educators are grappling with in how to reach the public with authentic information.
Thank you so much, NERIMA, and with that very eloquent presentation, let's now go to the only media person in this panel, mainstream media person in this panel. GADO, you have the difficult task of closing this question, the first question for us, in terms of the balancing and the need of the media to sell papers or advertising, most of which comes from government, to inform, as it's supposed to, ordinary citizens around Kenya and East Africa and the world, but also the need, to respond to what NERIMA has pointed out, that a lot of our media is owned by the same politicians who are in power and controlled by them. How has how have you guys been able to try and balance that? And what is your personal opinion on how successful the media has been in doing that? Thank you.
I think one, I'd like to thank also the NJOKI and NERIMA for very much eloquently putting the picture in the communities and what is happening. I think it's very, very important that we pretty much stay up to date with that. But to address what you're saying, I think I'll begin by saying, if you are to look also at the COVID pandemic itself, I always ask myself the question: has the media done enough, or forget about doing a good job? And I think the media, if you are to ask me, the answer is not at all. I think the media could have done far much better as far as this crisis is concerned. But to address also your question, there's also the issue of what is the media today, and you also have to understand also you have social media as your media today, and so that also comes into the picture in terms of the information that we get and how we received that information, and which are the platforms that we receive that information from. If you are to look at increasingly the people receive their information from different platforms and not necessarily from the traditional media organizations as newspapers, radios, and televisions. And so that has, in a way, very much not complicated matter, but it is we are dealing with a very different terrain of media today as compared to probably 10 years ago. I think that there has always been that question of how does the media balance its role. But I think the media or media practitioners have also tried to circumvent the issue of speaking truth to power by, introducing that question. Oh, we have to balance and all that. Whereas I agree that there has to be that balance. But the truth of the matter is that the media has a role. And if you abdicate your role at the expense of balancing, then you have no business being in the media. And so that is also what we have seen in the past, in recent years. I think there has to be, this is the question that has been raised, if you had to ask me many times, and George knows it very well, that the issue of media ownership, this has been discussed, has been raised time and time again. I think that is a very legitimate question that we have to, going forward, we have to raise, that the people, we have politicians and people in power owning media houses, and how does that fit into constitutionally? I mean, these are people who very much can subvert the truth. These are people who can use the very information to their own advantage, to prop, and so more often than not, we have seen them, using media as agents of profit rather than as agents that are charged with disseminating truth to the public. The role of the media is to do public good, and I think that has been eroded largely by the political leadership in this country. So there is a need to look into that, definitely into that area. I think one of the challenges that I face mostly as a political, as an editorial cartoonist and as a satirist, if I'm to use my own example, is that continually we are seeing the media houses sort of being afraid more and more to criticize the government, to question the government, to interrogate the government institutions. That is happening more and more in media houses, and this is a very worrying trend. I think, for example, I would ask, if you are to look even at the very simple question that NJOKI raised. I mean, the media could have done a very simple survey, going to communities and other places where they could have asked a simple question and actually take a survey of people who have actually been helped by the COVID-19 relief funds. That would have been actually a very good starting point, for example, of actually literally, questioning the government's response to the COVID-19 question. But the media has not done such a thing. If you were to look at even the funds that the scandals that we have seen, the media has raised that, but it has not also kept up with that issue. So that has called into question the role of the media today, and it goes back to what you were talking, what you raised earlier, that the media, the media ownership in the country. The landscape of the ownership says a lot about what is happening to the media. Then also lastly is we have to look at the role of the social media and in the whole of this issue. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, the media landscape today has changed dramatically. And one of the thing I think that one of the criticisms that I've had of the traditional media houses is that the failure to cope with these changes, so that they've been left behind. They are trying to cope with what is happening, but they can barely cope with that. Simply because they did not invest enough in these new tools that have emerged in the last 10 years that have been, essentially the main tools that disseminate information and news. And so you have a situation where everybody has jumped into the bandwagon. Today, anybody can actually get in online, get a blog, and peddling whatever nonsense that he wants, and he will have followings. So partly, of course, yes, we can. That's a discussion for another day. We can look at also the big, the so-called media, also global media organizations, and the Facebook, Google, Instagram, and others, and how they have set up these platforms and how they perform, and the algorithms and so forth, and misinformation. But the truth of the matter is that also you have a situation where the traditional media houses, especially in many African countries, and particularly in Kenya, that they've also failed to adjust and cope with this new phenomena. And so we find ourselves in a situation that is not only confusing, but actually quite dangerous. And when you have a situation like the COVID-19 pandemic, it makes matters even worse, because everybody can come and can get into there. And as we have seen, the spread of misinformation and disinformation during this era of the pandemic.
Thank you so much, GADO, for that, and especially as someone who works within that sector, for being so candid about the challenges and the failures of the mainstream media sector, but also highlighting the role that social media is playing in spreading information and disinformation. I think there was a second question around the trust in media. I think that has been addressed clearly. We don't trust the media at all. The public doesn't trust most of what the media is doing, because the media is not playing its rightful role. And George, as a leader in civil society and the sector that lead, an organization that clearly takes leadership in speaking truth to power, you have also led campaigns. We saw you when there were evictions in Kariobangi. You were there documenting and sharing this information. And I want to ask you briefly, what can we do? We can't, apart from lamenting around the challenges of information, what can we as individuals, organizations, and civil society do to ensure that the people have the right information, and to ensure that we also empower our media to play its rightful role as the fourth estate, which is right now, as GADO has implied, being taken over by social media?
I think the specific challenges of COVID-19, I mean, the challenges of the media playing its role, there are some that were specific to COVID-19, which had to do with the fact that no one in the world knew much about COVID-19 before a certain time. So it started with a situation where there was relatively little known by anybody, whether in the media or in the government or in society in general. So information now has been quickly accumulated, and people know a lot more than they did in March or earlier than that. So the ascendancy the government ended up with is because nobody knew much, but the government postured as though it knew a lot and excluded everybody from participation, where it would have been found that the government was also fumbling through a situation it actually didn't know much about. When NERIMA has talked about burial protocols that have changed, they are based on an ignorance. In the beginning, it was thought that people who have died of COVID-19, the corpses are themselves a source of infection. That was both fear and ignorance. The fact that there's more information and therefore less fear as a result of that information has led to a change of protocols. But because the government was deciding all those, making all those decisions in a dark room on its own, there was nobody else available to provide an alternative view. The responses have been government-led, government-exclusive, and one of the things that the media could have done is to insist on a seat at table rather than being told that you will come for the news briefing. The other thing that the media could have done is around, say, quarantine, for example. Quarantine ended up being a very, very secretive thing, although it shouldn't have been. The government put out information about where the quarantine centers would be, but beyond that, we don't have information even now of how many people ended up in quarantine, where exactly and why and how they ended up in those quarantines. So a cordon of secrecy was mounted around it, but that cordon of secrecy, with a little more aggression on the part of the media, could have been overcome. So what are the lessons? The lessons are the media should insist that everybody else, including people outside of the government, have a right to be at table deciding with the government when you are dealing with situations of this nature. Secondly, relying on only official sources has huge limitations, and this is a lesson that we've learned from the media. Always waited for the official briefing that came every day in the afternoon from the Ministry of Health. That has its huge limitations, and going forward, I think the media needs to plan around how it can find new independent sources of information that are outside of what we are being told officially. Thirdly, and the third lesson is that even in the gravest times, in the times of the gravest dangers to the country, those who plot the downfall of this country, those who plot to undermine the collective aspirations of the country and the public interest, they don't stop. They never stopped, even at the height of the gravest of our problems. They actually were looking for what the opportunity for them would be in getting ahead. That is how it came to be that the safety protocols have systematically been used to advance the political interests of the elites that are competing for political power. That is how it has come to be that people have stolen COVID-19 money. That even as people were shocked into, by what was going on around them, people were actively plotting how to steal the money themselves. So those lessons should be the source of calculations by media, and as to how it can better respond in future. We've seen the evictions themselves. That eviction in Kariobangi, it can't have happened. It can't have been planned in April. It has been something long in planning, but difficult to execute because it has huge political implications to evict 6,000 people the way they did. What they saw was the opportunity that COVID-19 provided. That the fact that people are in lockdown, the fact that there is less media access and less public access to to outrage or for what you're trying to do. This is our chance. If we don't evict those people now, we never will. So the people who are planning against the public interest never stopped planning. They kept looking for the opportunities in the COVID-19, and that is also an abiding lesson for us when we look back at what has happened. Can't hear you.
Mutemi, we can't hear you.
Sorry. I was muted. Thanks, George, for your response. And there's an echo. I don't know why there's an echo. I think there's someone who's playing this video somewhere. Okay, so that's better. There's a question there by Daniel Maidya, and it kind of responds to what communities did. And I'll ask NJOKI and then NERIMA to respond to how Kenyans circumvented the lack of leadership from the fourth estate. How did the communities, maybe briefly, not so long presentation, NJOKI and NERIMA because of time, in terms of what the communities that you work with did to mitigate lack of information. We saw great leadership in provision of, sanitation, provision of masks and that kind of thing, and use of social media for that, but also forums. Then NERIMA can also speak to how Kenyans responded to the little information that was available and the misinformation also. Thank you. So we start with NJOKI.
Sure. And you see, when we're talking about how to do this better and giving the prescriptions, one of the things that we need to understand is until we have an independent media, all these things that we're saying and all these things that we're prescribing will not work because first of all, the mainstream media, all the three at the top of your head, the four media stations that are actually leading in this country are actually owned by the three top leading families in this country in power, So how then would you expect that kind of media will be telling the stories of the people? And so we at the grassroots, there's one thing that we actually did during this pandemic, and it is what we are calling citizen journalism. So we were very intentional about covering our own stories and telling our own realities because we actually realized that even in the response that the government and the country at large were actually putting in place, were actually leaving us out. So you will find people giving all these measurements and protocols to actually follow, but are not factoring in our our realities and how far we can actually bring put this measurements into place. So we were very intentional about telling our own stories, and we were very we actually created platforms for people to tell their stories and to actually give reasons why they were defying when they were defying. Because in all these press briefings, the Mutahi Kagwe always came out and told Kenyans how indisciplined they were, and he kept saying this until people actually really believed it. And you would find people from the middle class really pounding on the people that come from informal settlements, telling them that, by the way, the reason why we would even go to a complete lockdown is because you people refuse to be responsible. It is because you people refuse to actually adhere to the rules that have actually been put out. Without being the wearer of the shoe, you will not understand. And the only way then I will make you understand is if I tell you my story and why the certain measurements that you put in place cannot work for me. So we actually adapted citizen journalism. And you see, one of the pressures that has come right now with mainstream media, and I'm actually a trained journalist, by the way, and I've worked in the media for a while. And there's what we call desktop journalism. There's so much pressure for scoop that you actually don't have time to go to the ground to actually verify when these things start going viral. And you see, information is actually really going very fast these days. One thing is trending right now, and by the time you're onto it and you want to verify, people have moved on to the next thing. And so this has really pushed people to actually adapt desktop journalism, where journalists actually just wake up every single day and they report from their desktops. You will go to Twitter and you will look at the trends, and you will try to follow the story, and you will, without verification, try to create a narrative. And from the influence that you actually get, that narrative sticks. So unless the people on the ground actually, unless there's that, what do we call it, that relationship, which is actually symbiotic, where mainstream media is actually relating to the people on the ground, that, for example, a big media house would want to run a story in Gedurai. Instead of calling the OCS in Gedurai for the true story, why don't you call someone who's actually there? I'll give a very good example. Last week, through this pandemic stories and forced disappearance, a young man actually disappeared in Gedurai, and we as the community members actually went out to protest for this, and Githurai actually was a standstill at that particular point. And the next day, the headline that actually ran on one of the biggest medias in the country right now was, we were protesting because we are a criminal gang, and our leader was killed. That I'm speaking about Thursday last week, and I mean, unless they have information that I do not have, that I'm a criminal leader, I belong in a criminal gang, this actually defames us and sells out the wrong narrative there, and it actually closes up any potential for justice. Because the narrative that is already there has socially engineered the community and the society to actually think that whatever now comes to us is something that we actually deserve. So citizen journalism now encourages us, people from Githurai, to actually tell the correct story and say whether, what, during this COVID-19 pandemic, so many youths have disappeared. Police brutality has been real, and our stories need to be told right.
Thank you so much, NJOKI. NERIMA, I have a personal theory, that part of the reason why we had all these lockdowns and the illusions of government doing something at a time when, as George points out, the government didn't know what to do, but didn't want us to know that it didn't know what to do, but it knew that we didn't know that it didn't know what to do. That part of this was to just placate the Kenyan middle class, to show us that something is being done, as we are safe in our working from home environments with internet and all our trinkets and privileges, and that all this, as NJOKI points out, took out the controls that were put in place took out, consideration for a huge sector of the Kenyan society. Most people in the rural areas or in the informal settlements. What is your view in terms of the responses that Kenyans did, the middle class and ordinary Kenyans, around the gaps that were identified around information and that kind of thing in the COVID-19 times? Thank you.
Thanks. It's an interesting theory. I do believe that there has been historical moments where our governments have taken advantage of fear and violated basic human rights. Whether it was intentional about the middle class, I don't think so. And the reason why I say that is because I learned a lot from Kericho County, and Kericho County specifically because we engaged with youth from all the 30 wards. There are representatives that we were able to ask in terms of, do you have access to a water point? Because Kericho County was very specific that after all these COVID budgets were sent, millions, and they had said that each of their wards would have up to 6 water points. So just asking the youth, how many of you have seen those 6 in your ward? We were able to get feedback that, of course, none of them had all 6. Some of them had up to 4, some of them had none. And then just collecting this information and sharing it with a key champion who was Honorable Bet to take to the assembly. The assembly actually did not know. And that I saw firsthand. And the fact that funds were already dispersed and them willing to coordinate. So it's not all so negative. I do believe that there are some individuals in government who wanted to be able to support the public, who are also grappling with this, and there was lack of information, because as much as government is very widespread, they still don't have the information that is required for them to provide these services. They're still short-staffed, short-handed. But at the end of it, it was very inspiring to me to see these youth being able to work with the police commandant and inform him of particular bars that were still functioning after curfew, some of them associated to police officers, and actually mapping the ones that are just completely violating the guidelines that are shared every day. And one was in Ainamoi. And this police commandant was able to go and raid that particular bar within the week. So you can see how quickly he acted upon it with information. But it takes a lot of support, and where I feel the middle class lacks and where we could even support more, the middle class are aware of this information. Like, if they wanted to, they would be willing to report certain issues happening in their communities, even your own neighborhood. When there's no power, we know very quickly, KPLC, even if I have to tag them on Twitter, I'll give them a call. This is the number. My internet is not working. I'll call my internet provider. So as soon as it affects them around their circle, they will act. But then when it's other issues that feel far away to the middle class, I feel that they do put themselves in this cluster where, what can I do about it? Is there anything that I can do about it anyway? So I do feel that we have that narrative with the middle class where they feel powerless, when in essence, what they can do is very minimal. Because when you're engaging with youth in rural communities, they actually don't know that they can take a step to report formally to the county government on a specific issue. They would need support on how to come up with this letter, which office is it, how do we mobilize, how do we organize? And that's where I think the middle class would be able to come in. But we're so bombarded, where I would say it could be intentional, that we are the fourth country globally with the most traffic, that we spend so much time as middle class going to work that by the time your taxes are so high, you're so concerned about how am I going to put food on the table, because our VAT is also high and food is also expensive, that you're focused on the high cost of living itself. And you're so worn out and bombarded with that. You're in that little circle only. And I think that's where we've lost the middle class. We are thinking about the country in general, the community is just too much. I just need to think about food for my family and my stability and basic living today. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, NERIMA. That is a very good take on that bit. And how do we then, and this is a general question, GADO, you can take us, start with this. How do we then, knowing all these challenges that you've highlighted, how do we mitigate the lack of leadership in information provision by the media? We have social media now taking over, but we have a lot of misinformation that you've spoken to. How can we start mitigating these, and especially knowing that COVID-19, there's still the question of whether it exists. If you talk to people in the streets, they'll tell you there's no COVID. It was all about the billions. But we do know that the virus is there. We do know people who've been affected. So how do we then start to emerge from, this information dark hole that we've been in? You're muted, GADO.
Well, I was saying maybe we pray. So we start there, maybe, because you're right. The situation is pretty bleak and worrying. I think for me, the one of the things that we can do, and also it's a very instructive to note that despite all what is happening, the positive side of this, actually, there are people and organizations that have taken leadership as far as the COVID-19 issue is concerned, in communities, across the board, so what to me, and I was thinking about this just a while ago, that okay, so what do we do basically? And if you look at the mistrust that we have expressed, that has been expressed, towards the government. I've spoken to a number of people, and it is actually amazing that immediately and from the beginning, and I do this, a lot. You talk to people and say, okay, so what do you think about this? What comes out immediately is basically the mistrust that the people have towards the government. So this is a scheme. In fact, they say COVID was just a scheme for the government just to, to steal money. There was nothing of it. And you're also talking to people who are fairly, even fairly educated and youth, who actually just believe this is COVID nonsense. It's just, it's a plot by government to steal funds. And you cannot blame them, because the government has over the years eroded the trust that has been bestowed onto itself, and therefore you have a situation that this crisis has come at the point where the trust was not there to begin with. So it is actually quite telling and quite worrying that you have that situation. And of course, there are also numerous other reasons that were raised, before. So for me, the way forward would probably is to look at the people and organizations that have shown leadership during this crisis. I think that is critical, and we have seen that from individuals, and I would name a few. You have I know of Jero, for example, and the initiative that he started. I mean, this is something that is very, for me, a fantastic response. And it didn't need, she didn't need to start, with $1 million to start this campaign. She organized herself and her team, and they started collecting funds to help out the people in need. I know people like Rachel Mukali and from in Mathare, if I'm not mistaken. What NJOKI is actually, and our organization, what they're doing. These are people we need to focus. I think we need to shift our focus when we have this kind of crisis to governments and the state institution alone, as organizations that probably they are going to help out or to solve our issues. And so what, for example, also even NERIMA is doing. I think those are the people that we can look up to. So my one of the things that can be done, and I'm glad that George is here, because I know George is as a head of one of the prominent organization in the country, and I know that he has been working with this organization, is to look at this kind of organization, this kind of leaders from the civil society. Unfortunately, I would argue that the government should do the same. The government should look at these the individuals and organizations that are already doing something in their communities, in their organizations, and they've been effective. Every time it's quite agonizing and a little bit disheartening when you hear that when we have this kind of crisis, the government is setting up new organizations, or you find these all sorts of organizers coming up. I mean, you already have people in the community. So if it comes to actually whether it is putting up funds in communities and in organizations, you already have organizations that are doing that. So why go and set up new organizations or put people who have no clue actually of what is happening in the communities and in our lives? So I think that is something that that can be done, and it is quite effective. I think I'm sure George will point out that there are a number of organizations that are actually doing a lot in their communities, in the informal sectors and in different other communities. Those are the organizations that the government can focus, can go, and instead of again trying to find out what to do. As far as the media is concerned, I think if I'm to speak from I think there is a need for the media to do a soul searching about its role and its future, because the future of the media, if you were to ask me, is also in danger. I don't want to point a bleak picture, but it's the reality that we see, and it will take a lot to change. I think change is possible, and I'm optimistic that that will happen. And I think this crisis is also
I think there's a challenge power with GADO. NJOKI, just starting from where GADO has left us, how do communities such as the ones you work with, the social justice movement, tell our stories better, provide information to Kenyans so that we are able to mitigate both the effects of COVID-19, but also the lack of leadership from our political class? How can communities going into the future, how do we mitigate the long-term effect of lack of credible information to enable us to do what we need to do as Kenyans to protect ourselves and also to take care of each other?
One thing that I would actually say it has come as a saving grace right now is the emergence of social media and the importance that it has taken in our spaces and in our life. That is actually a platform that we can use to tell our stories and make our stories matter. I know there are a lot of dangers and risks that come with the social media is a field. Anybody can do whatever if it's not actually taken care of. But it is one of the ways that we actually have as an alternative right now, because the mainstream media is unfortunately not anything that we can depend on wholly to tell our grassroots stories. But most importantly, again, is just pushing hard for us to also have our own independent spaces. I can tell you, setting up community radios and just community channels that speaks to the direct realities of different areas is a nightmare in this country, because they will not give you frequencies, and they will give you a whole list of things that you need to, a whole list of requirements that for people who are in the grassroots, really, it's impossible to meet. So I think we also need to get into that advocacy, where it is not so hard to actually get these frequencies, and so that we can actually set up our community radios and channels so that we can tell our stories ourselves, and they're not left to to the masses of the mainstream media, where they're sensationalized or they're packaged in a way that best suits commercial purposes, because our stories are best told when they're authentic, they're organic, and they're not repackaged to actually fit to market trends. So those are the two ways I actually think we can move forward.
Thank you. There is nothing to add to that. Thank you so much. That's very scientific. NERIMA, you've indicated, you've given us a positive story, and we know there are positive stories abound across Kenya. GADO did speak to the story of the initiative that Gerald Teach Sei started. Wanjeri Nderu also had an initiative. We've seen many other Kenyans filling the leadership gap that emerged around COVID-19. How do we then use some of these positive stories to inspire more Kenyans to take up? Because leadership is not just political leadership. We do have, every Kenyan can be a leader in the space they are in. What's your take on this, and how can we then, fill the information gap that is there using these stories?
I agree with GADO in terms of highlighting those individuals, organizations that have done so much for the public when they didn't have to, because it was very impressive seeing people who are not even in that space of health trying their best to even, a lot of people have learned how to make soap. A lot of people have worked on sanitizers. People have worked on food distribution, spaces that they never saw themselves in, but because they saw a gap and they decided to step up. And even asking friends to donate. People don't even have that resource, but they were finding ways to do that. But it's so unfortunate that oftentimes, even when the state is recognizing people who have done well for this country, those people do not show up anywhere when it comes to state recognition. And that's unfortunate. And that's one thing I think is important, because we need to be able to highlight people who are doing the best that they can for this country with the limited resources that they have. But it's also draining. There's a lot of fatigue because people assume that for you to be in that space, there's a lot of donor funding behind it, that you must be someone who is doing extremely well to want to do this. But for some people, it's just generally a calling. And we also have to change what success looks like to young people. Because if we're going to say that success only equates to wealth, it's not the welfare of our neighbors. We need to be concerned that people don't have access to water. And that was the point that NJOKI brought out. You're saying wash your hands, and who have no water in their own homes. Nairobi itself, most of the population doesn't have piped water. And that's a concern, especially considering that access to water, access to even shelter, education, those are our basic human rights, our basic rights in our constitution, in Article 43, and access to health as well. And I think during this period of the pandemic, it has shown us just how much lack of access the public has, how much funding goes toward it, and we cannot see the fruit of that funding. So we're seeing just the lack of accountability that exists. So I think it's a measure of accountability. If we're able to account for the funds that are distributed during this period, the individuals who have done well during this period, I think that would create such a huge, massive ripple effect. And it's concerning that even this year with the rollout of, the president's big four, access to health was part of it. But universal health care has failed in Nyeri County, in Kisumu County, in Machakos County. It has failed in the pilot counties that it was to work. So those are the things that when we're saying this pandemic might not be the last one, that this is actually the future when we talk about human beings and our interactions, and there might be another one, then we also need to be concerned that people in counties or in rural areas have absolutely no access to medication, or the fact that we saw stories of governors having their own ICU centers, things like that in their own homes should not be existing. And for me, that was what I would say in terms of, I don't think that everything that happens is all gloom. I do believe that there are entities that are working extremely hard in this country to be able to make our country more livable and people living in dignity. But unfortunately, those are the people who are the least funded and supported. So GADO's point was so key, that the government highlighting those organizations or entities in communities that already exist and making a conducive environment for them to continue to prosper and supporting them. That's one thing that we don't do in our country.
Thank you so much, NJOKI. NERIMA, I can see GADO still hasn't come back. I think I saw like he got a blackout. And on that, on what we need to do and who needs support, I'll take this question to George in terms of what civil society can do going forward, what development partners and Kenyans in general can do to address the gaps that we've all spoken to, but also, to support our media to rediscover itself, but also maybe to support alternative media as NJOKI has and NERIMA have spoken to. What do we need to, invest in? What can civil society do to ensure that we have information, we have access to the correct information, and we have that information circulating and enabling citizens to make the right decisions around the issues like COVID-19 and other. Hoping that NERIMA's prediction will not come true, that we're facing a bleak future. In case that happens, how do we handle this better going forward?
Okay. I would say, I think first, the point to make is that the social protection gaps that have been laid bare for all of us to see by COVID-19, it is tempting to think of what citizens can do to plug those gaps. And we've had quite a bit of that discussion here. But we should also remember that is what we've been doing. We pay taxes. Those taxes don't work for us. We start looking for private solutions as though we did not pay taxes. And COVID-19 has led us down that path again. What this should result in my view, is sufficient outrage on the part of citizens to the effect that because the government is not there for us, we have to use the outrage resulting from the failure to put in place a government that will be there for citizens, a government that accounts for the taxes that citizens pay. The temptation, which is understandable, of privatizing problems yet again is attractive, but it is something that should be shunned, and it is something that the failures that have been evident should motivate work against. The second point to make is the failures of the media. I just think that mainstream media is in a terminal crisis. It has reduced in its influence, it has reduced in its coverage, it has reduced in its mainstream media power has been going down, even as politicians are buying into it. They are buying into a shell of an industry because it is not making that much money anymore. And the only people who are able to make money using the space of media and make money consistently, it's tied to using media business to loot from the state. So after some time, I think I'm hoping that a realization will come that it is counterintuitive for media to continue, including the people who invest in media. It is not sustainable for the model we have where media does other than the things that media should do that should then make it marketable to the population. Media should be marketable to the population because it brings out certain things that the population wants to follow. If it is not doing that, then it is not good enough. It is like salt that has lost its saltiness. So social media has taken over or has come in because mainstream media has had those failings. But social media can never replace mainstream media because there's a certain validation that mainstream media provides, which social media doesn't provide. Once you read a story in social media, you want to read it in mainstream media for it to feel valid. And social media can't give you that. So it's a difficult conversation. I don't know what can be done, but what I think is that if it goes on like this, mainstream media faces a terminal crisis.
Thank you, George. More bleak predictions on top of what NERIMA has predicted. So I think we are wrapping up. We have 6 minutes. I'd like to give 2 minutes each to all of us. We start with the, particular, but let's start with NJOKI and then NERIMA. Just your final thoughts around this, and then we finish with the George. Thank you.
I think we're at a place where media actually has to internalize their role and how, you know, and how they shape a country, and how when they're not offering leadership, the consequences can be very, very dire. I'll give a very good example when it comes to the Rwanda genocide. We know there's a role that the media actually played in that. So the media is actually that one entity that actually decides whether a country makes it or breaks it, because it's the narrative shaper, it's the trend setter. So if the media of this country doesn't actually internalize its role and rise up to the occasion, we're headed up into a very bleak future. But I will not lose hope, because I know we have so many alternatives. Our voices are things that you cannot drown, and so when the instruments that are there are actually not serving the people, we the people will actually stand up, and will actually look for other ways and means for our voice to actually be heard and matter. So this is a challenge to the current media that is there. They have to have a deep introspection as to where they're leading this country, and how and take into stride the lessons of learned, especially during this pandemic, moving forward, because now, right immediately after the pandemic, we moved to a very tricky place. Not really even after the pandemic, because the pandemic is not going anywhere anytime soon, and people have really adjusted to it and are now going back into their normal lives. But we're moving into a very tricky situation where it's the election, and the mood that the media has already started setting is a mood that is a mood of fear mongering, and just leaving Wanjiko, leaving the people with feeling helpless and with no option. So the media must do better, and we must hold it to account. And when it's not doing what we want it to do, we will actually find a way where our voice will actually matter.
Yeah, thank you so much, NJOKI. NERIMA, your thoughts?
For me, I also say that in terms of, yes, social media is growing and it's having a major impact. And for me, what's a concern and something that I'll be looking at in the next decade or two is how it influences our politics and our governance, because it does. And the fact that we cannot forget Cambridge Analytica 2017. And so what's coming next? We're seeing the development of deep fakes, and also with the recent election in Germany, and Rezo, who was a youth who gave Angela Merkel a run for her money with CDU. And that's something that is definitely going to happen on our continent, and very soon. And we were able to see it in terms of conflict in South Sudan, where in 2013, people who are South Sudanese citizens, but being able to instigate violence in the country, but they're in Canada. Those are concerns to me. So I would say that when it comes to information and who controls information and how it's controlled, we're seeing a shift where social media is now feeding news to mainstream media, and mainstream media is grappling with their social media platforms to try and retain their audience. So when we're talking about a majority youth population that no longer have to rush home to get to a radio at 7 or 9 p.m. to listen to the news, they can do it anytime that they feel like, from any platform that they feel like, is something that I don't think we're coming to understanding clearly enough and fast enough. And I think that COVID-19 actually expedited that process. It made it even quicker, because now we've introduced online classes to children, and children are now getting the grasp of online engagement much, much earlier than my generation itself. And so that means a lot. And I think that institutions are not quite ready for that change. And I think that it's going to be a new niche that we have to be concerned about in the future when it comes to information.
Thank you so much, NERIMA, for that. George, call upon you to wrap it up for us as we move on. How do we hold all these institutions and government to account, but also what is our role, as citizens to ensure that we have a better future? You're muted, George.
I'll just borrow from the things that NERIMA has reflected on, which I found amazing. I think our capacity to organize virtually and to interact with the virtual world has been forced on us largely. I mean, it was always building, but COVID-19 has increased that, so that will continue. And it will have effects, several effects. One effect is citizens will be able to conquer, or peoples will conquer distances and space more easily and organize over large regions. We are able now to do a webinar with people who are in America, and so we've conquered that space, and we are more we are more settled at using technologies than before COVID-19, because the elite nature of technologies that was pre-COVID-19 that still exists will keep being undermined. Technologies will become more and more ordinary. People will become more and more comfortable with technologies now, and with using gadgets to organize, to meet, to interact, and so on and so forth. Where does that leave media? It means that news will become more and more virtual. It means that the power that organized media has will keep diluting, because if I can see it and report it as a citizen in a village where there's no formal journalist, then I'm the one who carries that story. So how media survives and thrives in such a diffuse world will be an important thing to think about and to watch into the future. And how politics and the interaction with authorities is organized in that kind of world is something that we will be continuing to look at. Governments, including our own, fear citizens, and that is why assembly is very, very discouraged. Every time people go out to meet, you need permits, and even on your permits, you may end up being clobbered. But the idea that people have to be assembled in one place for them to talk about things that they feel about government is also being undermined by the fact that people can organize virtually. So governments don't fear people gathered in a city square somewhere for the crisis to materialize. They also fear people gathered online, and so the online crackdowns that we see, including in Tanzania, will continue because of that fear. The problems we've had with services, as demonstrated by as laid by COVID-19, means that citizens have to be realistic about what reliance they place on government, and if they can't place on that much reliance on government, then citizens have to become government themselves. You've got to do the politics. You can't just talk about the politics. You've got to enter the politics with the ideas that people have and take leadership. That is now possible. The space exists. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, George. Thank you, NERIMA. Thank you, NJOKI. And thank you, GADO, who dropped off because of connection challenges. It's been a very engaging discussion, and it's good that we've all left with a very positive note that despite all the bleakness, and despite the fact that we are all speaking truth to power, there are things we can do, and there are positives to draw from what has happened with COVID-19. Now we are more connected. I remember I've been using Zoom Connect since 2016. I used to ask people to do Zoom meetings, but they would insist that I have to go to their offices physically. I've seen a lot of them who have now become quite proficient at Zoom for meetings, but also for organizing. As we keep, maybe this space will render governments and government's effort to cramp down on citizens and to prevent us from meeting at the public square irrelevant, and we'll be able to organize much better. And maybe the government of the future might be quite different from the government that is trying to protect its space right now. And with that, I want to hand over back to the hosts. Asanteni sana.